Hey guys, welcome back to Bryan's Mysteries and Adventures on Trail. I hope everyone's getting ready for a fun Halloween. I know where I grew up, they called tonight Mischief Night. It was basically like where all the kids would go out and, I don't know, do silly things like toilet paper their friends' houses and things like that. But I hope everyone's got their costume ideas ready, and this is just going to be the first video of my Halloween series. But so today we're going to be talking about Bigfoot, the legend of Bigfoot, the history of him, and just all different facts, different sightings, and just, yeah, all kinds of information on the legendary Bigfoot, also known as, so there's several different names for this creature, or this cryptid, if you will. We refer to it as Bigfoot or Sasquatch in the Pacific Northwest and the western part of Canada. Down in Australia, they refer to it as the Yowie, and in parts of Florida and other southern regions, they call them the skunk ape. And then, of course, you have in Russia, in the Himalayas and the big mountain areas, they are referred to as the Yeti or the abominable snowman. Now, there is a difference, at least in sightings and different research, but the difference between the Yeti and the Sasquatch is mainly size. The Yeti is roughly estimated to be usually around 6 feet tall, and they're also reported to be more aggressive when they are encountered. Again, this is all if you believe in this. I'm just going to give you guys facts and what I've researched. So the abominable snowman is just known to be more aggressive when it is encountered, whereas the North American Sasquatch and Yowie are much more elusive, and when they are encountered, they usually just run off. Now, maybe that's just because where the Yeti lives, there's snow and ice, there's not as much food, so who knows. The Sasquatch is often described as a bipedal, measuring up to 2.75 meters or 10 feet tall, up to 10 feet tall. It is usually covered with, the description is usually long, dark hair, and the footprints have been measured up to 50 centimeters or 20 inches. And of course, people have taken plaster casts of them from all over the world, but again, authenticity is always a disputed factor. We can trace the history of the Sasquatch, or this ape-like type being, all the way back to ancient Mesopotamia in the story of the King Gilgamesh and Enkidu. Basically, in this poem about King Gilgamesh in the Sumerian text, this was like 1800 BC, and it was described that this friend or companion of King Gilgamesh was this creature named Enkidu, and he was described as this big, hairy, monster-like being with extreme strength, and he was just portrayed to be like, this thing that lived out in the woods. And who knows, this could be the ancients' description of a Sasquatch, but this is generally considered one of the first documented or some written stories of a Bigfoot-like creature. And we can see these stories all throughout history. The great explorer Leif Erikson, who is considered to be one of the most vast explorers and covered the most amazing distances, in the 10th century AD, he described seeing these creatures that were covered with long, dark hair. They had very dark eyes, and he said they had a very terrible sulfur smell. And he was very familiar with all the different indigenous tribes throughout different areas that he had explored. So it was very interesting that he described these creatures of, sort of exactly how people in modern days describe them, having these big, massive creatures with dark eyes and this sulfur-like smell, covered in this dark brown hair. One of the most modern documented sightings of the Sasquatch was an 1884 article in the Victoria's British Colonist, and this article described the capture of basically a half-man, half-beast that they nicknamed Jacko, and the creature was said to be, full of dark hair, and it had apparently been chased by a group of men up through this town and they threw rocks at it, knocked it out, and it was lying there. And they went on to discuss like how this thing looked like a giant ape, But then as we move further through history, John Green, who is a British Columbia-based author, or was, he has since passed away, but he wrote many books on the Sasquatch, and he subsequently found that this earlier article of 1884 was a hoax. But Green is considered to have compiled the biggest database of merely over 1,300 Sasquatch and Bigfoot sightings in North America between the early 19th century and 1995. And he analyzed thousands of witness accounts, and he basically said that the Sasquatch is, based on these accounts, is supposed to have superhuman speed, super strength, the ability to overcome crazy obstacles, and basically disappear into the brush without, like, in the blink of an eye. And some also report that the Sasquatch is able to swim too. We also see many ancient documentation of the Sasquatch or Bigfoot in Indian and Native American text. The Anasazi wrote many texts about this creature and how they believed it was something between the real and spiritual world. And even in these ancient petroglyphs, we can see depictions of Bigfoot-like creatures and Bigfoot footprints. So all throughout history we have these varying evidence, and they all seem to be similar accounts through different continents, all these different continents that are separated by massive amounts of water and time. But even throughout time, the accounts all seem to be roughly the same in nature. The description of the creature, the smell, the sound that it makes. The sound is often described as a whistling and howling sound that is apparently very, very unique just to this creature. Now, I've never seen a Bigfoot or heard one, so I don't know. I'm sure a lot of you are much more familiar with this topic, and I'd love to hear your input in the comments. One of the most seminal sightings was in Mount Everest back on November 9th of 1951 at roughly 18,000 feet, when two British explorers, Eric Shipton and Michael Ward, they discovered a mile-long track of these footprints. And these footprints seemed to be a large primate, and after they were examined by scientists, the main difference between these and a primate's footprint is, and the Bigfoot footprint, it lacks a divergent big toe, which basically means that it's mainly a terrestrial peripatetic being. It just only walks upright on land. It's no longer in trees or anything like that. And then that really sparked a huge interest in the Bigfoot phenomenon, because people saw those footprints as actual proof. Because when scientists looked at those footprints, it was very hard to debunk them, because apparently when they did the test on them, the way the imprints were, it would be a very, very hard footprint to fake. Again, I'm not saying it's not possible, just according to what the scientists said after seeing those, based on the impressions, they said it was a very, very genuine looking footprint. And since that time, we've had more and more of these types of footprints recorded, and then of course sightings. One of the most famous back in 1967, this was recorded, and this is one of the most controversial, because some people, they just swear by this video being, the solid proof, and then others say, well, no, it's the solid proof that this was just a fake. And personally, I don't think that looks very real, but that's just me. I think that nowadays we have much better looking proof than that video. But that's just me. And unfortunately, people that really are into this, really are into, finding Bigfoot, the more that people fake these things, the more it's hard for people that are actually trying to prove it to get the validity behind their statements believed, because of all these fakes out there. According to some of the academic research, in 2012, these researchers from Oxford University, they put together this genetic test where they were studying the relationship between Homo sapiens and other hominids. And Professor Bryan Sykes, he put out a call for submissions of people that believed that they had evidence of, the Sasquatch, the Yeti, Bigfoot, etc. And their team analyzed over 36 samples, mostly hair, from all different countries, including the United States. And all of the samples were found to be bears or other common animals like horses, porcupines. One was even human. However, Professor Sykes did tell the media that while these samples turned out to be not from an ape-like creature, it doesn't mean that one doesn't exist. Then in 2017, another team led by geneticist Charlotte Lindquist of the University of Buffalo determined that 8 hair samples purportedly from a yeti actually in fact belong to a bear species in the Himalayan region. And another bunch of samples were determined to be dogs and various other animals. So I think like for the hair samples and things like that, all these genetic samples have never really turned out to be anything. But again, that doesn't mean anything. It just means that the samples collected weren't of Bigfoot. So I think one of the most interesting points that some people have made is about Gigantopithecus, which is the biggest known hominid that we actually do have evidence of. We do have a fossil record of. And it was this giant ape-like species that lived towards the end of the Pleistocene period. And it was absolutely enormous, roughly 10 feet tall, and a lot of people believe that Bigfoot is just a descendant of Gigantopithecus, which could very well be true. It could just be, hiding in the vast forests of the Pacific Northwest and other areas. But I think another really interesting fact was that all the sightings generally throughout all the years, hundreds and hundreds of years of sightings, they all say that when they do see a Bigfoot, a Yowie, what have you, that has a terrible sulfur smell. And that kind of struck a chord with me because I was thinking about it, and the only time I've ever smelled that terrible sulfur smell is when I'm in Lassen Volcanic National Park, and it's, you can smell that sulfur coming up from the ground. So it got me thinking, and I think it's quite plausible that if Bigfoot does exist, that they live underground. And that's possibly one of the reasons why they all smell like that terrible sulfur smell, because they've been living underground their whole lives, and they're probably just accustomed to it. And from what I understand, there is a huge network of caves all over the world. And a huge percentage of the majority of them haven't even been discovered or explored. So it is quite plausible that there's just, if this Bigfoot creature does exist, the reason that we don't ever see it much is because, for one, it lives underground and it probably just comes up to hunt or find food, whatever, but I think it's a good possibility or hypothesis that if they do exist, they are subterranean dwellers. This is a map of the caves that we do know of in the United States, and these just are the ones that we have explored somewhat and have a knowledge of, and as you can see, they're everywhere. So I don't know, I think it's also probably a reason why they are able to stay so elusive. And the Bigfoot Sasquatch is supposed to be a very intelligent creature. I think that's one thing that humans, we have this problem of, we always think like, oh, well, if a human can't do it, then nothing can do it. We really have to start thinking outside the box with not just Bigfoot, a lot of things. I mean, just things in general. But I think if you're looking for something like Bigfoot, the unknown, this is an intelligent creature that's obviously been able to be elusive for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Well, maybe one of the reasons is because it can make itself disappear in the woods or underground. I mean, think about all the things that us humans have come up with, camouflage and different hunting blinds. Well, think about if we never left the woods and we were always living in the woods or underground. I'm sure we'd have a whole system of different camouflage and different trapdoors and ways of just disappearing from prey. And I'm sure that, if the Sasquatch does exist, unfortunately, man is probably its only predator. And that's one reason that it's probably so elusive, because it probably sees man and it knows that, well, man is the only thing that could possibly kill me, so I'm out of here. And again, this is just me speculating, but from the majority of supposed accounts or encounters of the Sasquatch, at least in North America and the Pacific Northwest, it's a very, very small percentage, if any, that where the Bigfoot acts aggressive. Normally, during these encounters, the people, someone runs into one and it's usually the Bigfoot sees them and runs off in the opposite direction. There was one report that I read where a hunter in Montana was out, and he was just about to go out into this patch of woods, and he came upon what he believed to be a Sasquatch, and he had his gun with him, and apparently he fired off a round, and what he described was the Sasquatch just sort of disappeared into this ball of light before his eyes. You know, whether that's true or not, but there's been all kinds of accounts throughout the years. Some like this, some of just hikers, you know, hiking down the trail and seeing a big hairy-like ape and smelling a very foul smell. Occasionally people will be out hunting and they will come across them and they hear these terrible, horrifying screams or whistles, or sort of a whistle and growling sound that seems to echo off the mountains. It's so loud. So, I mean, there have been some really fascinating reports, including some by President Theodore Roosevelt. In his 1893 The Wilderness Hunter, which was a memoir of his time in Montana and Wyoming, he wrote about what he called the Bowman incident, and it was this hunter, this old hunter that he had met while he was on his expedition, and this guy, Bowman, told him this harrowing tale of, well, about a Sasquatch and an incident at their camp. And the way Teddy Roosevelt recounted the story, it's pretty crazy, and people believe from that story that he was talking about a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch. No matter what you believe, the Sasquatch or Bigfoot really does inspire the imaginations of, you know, just exploration and adventure, and has apparently inspired the hearts and imaginations of people for centuries. And I just think it's one of those enduring mysteries and legends that will always be a place of wonder and desire to know in the minds of humans. And who knows if we'll ever find out the truth. Maybe it's just one of those things that we're not meant to know about. Maybe it's just one of those things we're just only supposed to see on the glassy surface. Or maybe with advancing technologies, one day humans and Bigfoot will come together. I guess we'll find out as time goes on. Will you be ready if that time comes?